Hi all, welcome to another fantastic game from TCEC Season 18 Super Final. This is a really dramatic game, really wild. So Super Final Round 8, TCEC Season 18. And before we get on, please do give the video a like and subscribe just in case you forget later. I did vigorously brush my hair just for you guys. It's getting longer and longer, and it takes longer and longer time to sort out my hair, let alone any pronunciation issues. But anyway, here, okay, Stockfish and Leela, they're easy to pronounce. So d4 from Stockfish, we have Leela playing d5, we're in the book, c4, c6, knight f3, e6, we're still in the book, so the solid triangle of the semi-Slav defense. So the semi-Slav, a very tried and tested weapon now, very popular at Super Grandmaster level, very, very solid. There's the idea that if you play a solid opening, you're set up for the rest of the game. Although, can you ruin, do you think, a solid opening with one move or two? Do you think you could go against that philosophy sometimes, and it doesn't matter the solid moves you played beforehand? Because, curiously, in this game, after knight c3, d takes c4, bishop g5, we see a big sense of humour from Jerome, who sets the opening books for these games. But to be fair, in the previous round, Stockfish was able to draw with the black pieces, even with this next move, which is f6. For me, this feels as if it's loosening some of the light squares in black's position, potentially. So it is a bit of a loosening move. Ben Feingold has said never play f6, to which apparently there's a Quora question I'm hoping to answer soon myself. I think one of the things about f6, when the king's usually castle, the default position is g8 and g1. When you move your f-pawn as a general principle, you're kind of weakening that diagonal of death that might emerge. Always on the lookout for that diagonal of death. So f6 in principle is a bad move. But in this particular position, is this diagonal really that exploitable? Not at the moment. The bishop goes to d2 here, b5, and we have the end of the book. Statistically, the stats are actually really, really good. If you check out ChessBase Live Book, they seem to be more than 65% quite often, especially with bishop d2. Slightly higher percentage with bishop d2 than with bishop f4. So this might actually be one of the more accurate moves. So b5, okay, end of book. We have now what I consider actually is a super critical reply here. Now, a super critical move. I think this is a great move myself. In fact, I prefer it to Leela's treatment. In the prior game that Stockfish was able to hold a draw, Leela, it seems, chose e4. Now, maybe this is even more critical than e4. This is a4, and a lot of over-the-board games, it seems the grandmasters prefer a4 as well. So perhaps it's more critical to undermine this pawn chain immediately. Black plays b4. Now, if a6, as an example, then white can just play like this, and there isn't really an interesting exchange sacrifice. This position is just very nice for white after queen a1. There isn't much compensation for black here. Sometimes there might be in certain positions, but not here. White's just clearly better. So for example, here takes, or queen takes, rook takes, it's just clearly better for white. So b4 loosens, though, the light squares a bit more, and in fact Stockfish is able to play a kind of Alekhine maneuver favourite. Alexander Alekhine loved manoeuvring in the Queen's Game at Decline type positions. His knight to g3, he drew at least 7 games with Capablanca in their World Championship match with this knight manoeuvre. It was one of his favourites anyway. So we have here the knight on e4. In fact, Leela plays f5, a forcing move, and I would have expected, if you had shown me this game, I would have thought that Stockfish is playing with the black pieces, because often Stockfish doesn't mind moving lots of pawns, but it's actually Leela moving lots of pawns in the opening here, The thing is, okay, if bishop e7, if the knight's left on e4, after knight g3, what does actually black do? I mean, bishop e7 is actually occupying a parking space. If here, yeah, white can go all in with structural damage. It's going to be much better. It's a tricky position. Black doesn't really want to give up the dark square bishop. So this knight's it's actually a real nuisance here. So it's kind of understandable in a way, f5, to have this downside. It does weaken, of course, some extra dark squares like e5. We have knight f6. If a5, trying to reinforce that, white shouldn't be permitted e4. That would seem really, really horrible. This position is super horrible. And that diagonal is nasty, and the e-file is end of game. So knight f6, trying to clamp down on e4. e3, and in fact this c-pawn is protected. We have bishop e2. If white tries to play rook c1 to put more pressure on c4, perhaps queen d5 is handy here for black. After bishop e2, c5, this might actually be only a small edge for white here. It's interesting. So anyway, bishop e2, we have c5 immediately. Now d takes c5, knight bd7. Interesting, because actually Stockfish plays c6. This might seem super pedantic. Surely this pawn is going to fall off at some point. And all this has done is encourage the knight, surely, to go to a strong square. It looks like, on the surface, a strong square, but it does mean sometimes this pawn might be hanging, sometimes. Not here, there's things like check and bishop takes b4 check. But Stockfish plays actually here. There's also a big idea with knight c5 of knight b3, forking the rook and knight, potentially. So actually we have knight d4, which kind of guards, as one property of it, it guards b3. Another, it kind of protects this one. Another, it kind of dissuades sometimes e5 even more. We have another forcing pawn move from Leela, f4. This seems to me rather uncharacteristic of Leela. In fact, I would venture that in this particular opening sequence, I think Leela's out of her training territory. I think she would have much preferred knight f6 instead of f6 from earlier after that bishop g5, which is quite a well-trodden, solid path. Here we're on the escalation of anti-solidity, fluidity of black's position, lots of weaknesses to try and exploit. Knight h5. We have knight f e4. On knight takes h5, bishop takes g6, bishop e2. This position, it's very nice after knight f3. This position, white can just offer an exchange if needed and be in really a great position here. This is just a really nice position for white. So we have knight f e4. Now white castles e5. Now, hasn't Leela played quite actively with the king in the centre? The general advice is not to indulge too much in active operations before castling, because that's like breaching an art of war principle, which is more broadly, put the skillful, experienced fighter tries to put themselves beyond defeat before going on the attack. And here, this indulgence of this knight to hit d2, but with the king in the centre, can it be punished here by Stockfish? In some respects, you might consider white's pieces a bit strange, actually. The bishop's kind of passively on d2 and e2, the knight's on h5. They're a bit disconnected. You could argue, doesn't black's pieces, they look more centrally perched right now. But the whole picture is changed, in fact. I would say this is a representation of a literal backfire here with Stockfish's next move in the position, which is virtually forced, really. There's not too many major alternatives. Can you guess, if I take the arrows away, what Stockfish played in this position? So white to play here, what would you play? Okay, bishop takes b4, sacrificing that knight, and now taking another pawn, and this knight's kind of more central now. You can see that there's big dangers in this position. Knight takes f4 is a really, really strong move, as you'd expect on this hardware. If e takes, perhaps black had knight b3. Bishop takes, king takes, d5, queen d6 might be the most accurate. And we get a position which might be about even, or black might even be slightly better placed here. So, yeah, knight takes f4 though, very, very strong, instead of e takes d4. Vacating h5, which means sometimes bishop h5 is a concern for black. The king being in the centre is a big concern. There's all sorts of concerns really here tactically. We have rook b8. And another amazing move in this position is played. Can you guess what white plays here? Okay, it seems Stockfish is more interested in winning pawns for the moment with the king in the centre, with e takes d4. So now Stockfish has 7 pawns, there's only 1 pawn missing as a quick count. Whilst Leela has now only 4 pawns, but after rook takes b4, Leela has 2 extra pieces. Now you might wonder, hold on, this e takes d4, if bishop takes c5, black could develop with bishop takes c5, and this position should be about even, basically. Black shouldn't have any real problems, as you might expect. So this, though, e takes d4, sacrificing another piece, with the king still in the centre, this is asking for trouble, surely. All these active operations, and black hasn't put themselves beyond defeat. We have rook e1 being played, just casually rook e1. Yeah, that's really the point of it. If d takes, then black could take the queens off. This is a very, very tactical sequence where black has the advantage. White could only hope for a kind of only to equal with best play here. Only to be equal with c4, very tactical c4 in this circumstance. And yeah, this is not something white wants to do with the simplification. So that's a way of white getting a big advantage. But no, if there's a better way of playing it, sorry, not rook takes e4, bishop b6, and we end up with white only having a small edge. So anyway, that's a different story. What we have here is a very dramatic story. 2 pieces down, just casually playing rook e1, pointing at the black king. So all of Leela's pawn moves, a lot of those pawns have now gone. But Leela is, you could argue, 2 pieces up. As an alternative, by the way, to on move 20 rook e1, I did check out c7. Doesn't really do too much after queen d6. This position should be kind of about equal. It's very, very tactical stuff, but with careful play, it's only about equal. c7 has some venom on queen takes. Then there's the tempo gaining knight d5, and here knight takes with a big advantage for white. But otherwise, yeah, with queen d6, the careful queen d6, that's fine, it seems. So anyway, the critical move, rook e1, is played. We have bishop e7. So not daring to move this because horrible things are about to happen on this e file. Basically, so black tries to just give a piece back to try and castle potentially. We have check g6. Now d takes c5, and queens come off. At this moment, Stockfish is only 1 minor piece down, but with the extra pawns. So knight f6. But now, yeah, because if taking, then rook takes. It looks pretty nasty. And there's things like knight d5 after hitting b4 and e7 that looks nasty. So we have knight f6. helping protect d5. But here, Stockfish is still a piece down right now with the knight and bishop against the knight and two bishops. Guess what Stockfish plays in this position? It really is a backfire with the king in the centre. I mean, literally, this is a textbook game, I would say, so far for the king in the centre. And what Stockfish plays now, 100 points if you can guess it. 10 seconds. Yes, bishop takes g6, hg, knight takes. So even though back to 2 pieces down, material is going to be 1 here after rook h7. If king f7, it's even worse actually. Just take the rook and then come back for more with knight g6. White's easily winning that. So rook h7. And you might think, well, hold on. Well, what's the winning move here then? This is really well calculated, as you might expect, from the tactical monster and might of Stockfish. White play here for 100 points. If I give you 10 seconds to pause the video. With the king in the centre, these nasty pins around, the power of the pin piece is illusionary, as Nimzovich says. And in fact, it's an illusion. It's holding f6. It's f6 that is targeted, coincidentally. So rook takes f6 is a big threat. And it is getting super difficult to defend this position. I mean, there are lots of horrendous variations. I mean, I didn't even dare analyze this, but you can see, I mean, if we just put this on the board, it looks as though, you know, c7 is super strong, threatening things like rook d8 checks. The bishop's also not protecting this and hitting this. All sorts of nice, nasty threats exist in this position. So, a tricky position indeed. We have knight e4 being played. If king f7, knight takes e7, rook takes c7 here, and c6, and you know c8, it's going to be winning for white. So knight e4 was tried. Rook takes e4. Rook takes b2. h3 to give the king some air. Yeah, if rook d7, then the back row is exposed. So it's important to give the king some air in the midst of this. A piece down for the moment. c3, Black tries to use, Leela tries to use the passed pawn. But now, a really vicious move. Rook f6. And the bishop's also not protecting f8, is it? And there's a rook f8 checkmate threat because the pawn's covering d7. So we have king d8. Now knight takes e7, wins a piece back, and it's going to be the exchange up for white. There is the little issue, or not so little, if it was a human game, we'd probably be really scared about this pawn. But this is managed here after rook takes. After check, rook takes e7 check. Rook f6 check to keep an eye on the bishop, potentially, to win that in the end. Rook e3, check. So white's just the exchange up. If c2 had been played here, then just rook c3, and white can give up that rook to get the bishop there with a winning endgame. So this is totally winning now anyway, after check, because of the Tarrasch rule. The rook getting behind the pawn is the Tarrasch rule. There's a nice wiki page on it. Get behind your opponent's passed pawns, like this. Bishop d3, we have check, and now taking this. And this is an easily won rook and pawn ending after all that. The smoke has cleared. After g4, king d5, it was resigned for black. White just actually could just take off the rooks and be first to queen. Very, very easy win there. So a really dramatic game. Stockfish totally in its element, I believe, after that f6 move. I suspect overall because of the tactical resourcefulness needed to defend such a possession after f6, I suspect Stockfish did incredibly well in the previous round to draw it with black. It was a masterpiece in its own right. If I did cover draws, I think it would be a nice one to cover. I want to prioritise decisive games first, though. So in this set of games, 1.5 to Stockfish because of this win now from this intriguing opening. It's a really off the beaten path. If we look at f6 back in the opening, there's only about less than 100 games on that compared to over 2,000 for knight f6, the more solid knight f6 after bishop g5. But a very, very interesting tactical game anyway, showing off Stockfish's major strengths, especially tactically. And okay, if you want to check out my playlist, bit.ly/Leela Chas, bit.ly/Stockfish Chas, Kingscrusher TV /Discord for chatting. If you want to challenge me for a game, kingscrusher.tv. If you register there, I'll be able to invite you for a game, or bit.ly/Chasmold. All likes, comments, subscribes, all really appreciated. Okay. Thanks very much.